So it's about half 1 a.m. and I'm watching the local election results. Just show you a quick screenshot. Doing BBC analysis there. I'm not going to give a running commentary, just that um, Graham Miller, the leader of the Sunderland Labour Party, has spoken about the situation here, and it looks like UKIP and other parties, smaller parties, have done well in this city. As for Sunderland, we have one of the strongest Leave contingents in the country, so it's not surprising that UKIP's doing well. They want to punish Labour. Although this is a strong Labour city, it's very obvious that's what's happening, and I think Mr. Miller was very honest about that. Um, However, apparently the other smaller parties are also doing well in this city, including the Greens and Lib Dems, and they're certainly not Eurosceptic parties, so be interested to see where that comes from. I want to talk a bit about the situation with Gavin Williamson. Um, Gavin Williamson's been sacked over being accused of being the leak on the National Security Council meeting, and it's been being treated very seriously. Theresa May was clearly furious about it. Tense exchange of letters, which was shown on the news yesterday, and it's been covered in yesterday's papers. Um, Now, the interesting thing is, Williamson is swearing on his children's lives. That's a pretty profound statement to make, that he is innocent. Yet his colleagues seem to believe that he is guilty. Williamson's quite a colourful character. He's been derided as Private Pike. Some of the press analysis were saying that he's went too far this time, or that he was always out of his depth. Certainly, he always had that Francis Urquhart sort of thing about him, in the sense that he rose so fast to a pretty senior cabinet position from having no ministerial experience. And the cynicism was understandable. He was a close ally of May. Penny Mordaunt has now taken his role. Rory Stewart has been moved into the Office of International Development. Penny Mordaunt becomes the first woman Defence Secretary, but she was a Royal Naval Reservist, so she's not without experience. But back to Gavin Williamson. It's a very strange situation. I mean, for this guy to swear on his children's lives that he's innocent is really profound. All I can say is, if he's not telling the truth, then he really is Francis Urquhart, because that's profound. He apparently kept a tarantula on his office desk called Kronos, to intimidate colleagues. Um, I think he was always seen as a bit of a slippery character, but I have some respect for Gavin Williamson. I feel that he was one of the very few cabinet ministers to actually have the assertiveness to speak out vocally against Russia and China. Now, his statement on Russia, just shut up and go away, was a little bit schoolboyish, true. I would have worded it much more bluntly than that. But his positions on China, in my view, were absolutely right. I think Theresa May has demonstrated absolutely that her administration's being pushed around by Beijing. This Huawei thing is a complete. We're shooting ourselves in the foot with it. It just makes no sense. The United States, Australia, and New Zealand has warned about it. GCHQ has warned about it. So why the hell have they went ahead with it? And I can only speculate that it is A, because Beijing's pushing us around, and B, because they're desperate to shore up post Brexit trade, which is yet another example of why Brexit is a mess, because this is what we're resorting to, doing the deal with totalitarian regimes, bending over backwards for the likes of the Chinese Communist Party. That's hardly taking back control. Um, I don't trust Huawei. I mean, the CEO may absolutely convince himself that, oh, I'm not going to. You can trust me. I'm not going to sell secrets to the Chinese state. But he is duty bound to. So even if he really believes that he's foolproof, he is actually duty bound to. It's in the Chinese constitution that any company, I believe it's Article 6, any company will provide the government with any information deemed important to them. I mean, the CCP has absolute power in China in every aspect of life, in every field, in everybody. So I don't trust that for a second. Even if you do believe that, apparently this Huawei 5G technology is not foolproof anyway, so it in itself could be hacked. Um, but Theresa May has kind of made this halfway house of not going to the full 5G core side of it. I don't really know what that means. I think it means that it's kind of a halfway house, not going to the full extent and yet not taking it. So she's put us in this kind of limbo whereby we're pandering to Beijing, but not the whole way, and yet we've just disregarded GCHQ's warnings. Apparently, I was wrong earlier. I said that Jeremy Hunt, along with Theresa May, had not done enough about China. Apparently, he too was uneasy about this, along with Gavin Williamson and other cabinet colleagues who were uneasy about this Huawei contract. So it seems it's come down to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, and it just seems crazy to me. They both blame Gavin Williamson for trade meeting going ahead, apparently because of his comments on the South China Sea. Now, you could call that reckless. I think Gavin Williamson, okay, maybe he's ambitious, it's politics, but for once, I would like to see cabinet ministers standing up to Beijing. I would like to see the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom standing up to Beijing. I think Theresa May was strong on Russia. She took assertive action after the Salisbury incident, threw out Russian personnel. That was good. That was needed. But we are still, frankly, a soft touch. CGTN is going ahead in London, and I know the government doesn't have the final say in that, but they could still make some noise about it, and they haven't. Um, I wrote to the Secretary of State for Culture, Media, and Sport, and the response was, "Oh well, it's out of our hands. It's all up to Ofcom." Now Ofcom will say the same thing, and Ofcom has been absolutely toothless in this. They gave verbal warnings to Russia, but then have done pretty much nothing since. So I really feel very angry that we're being pushed around. Whenever Beijing doesn't get its way, it's hurt feelings. The Chinese embassy needs to mind its own damn business and remember that they're guests in this country. I mean, there is absolutely no way British personnel have the sort of freedom to kick up the sort of tantrums they do in China. So I don't see why we should put up with their their constant whinging and they're playing the victim and they're insulting us. I mean, when Gavin Williamson made those statements, they very sarcastically said certain UK ministers are very ambitious and they want to. So they seem to think it's perfectly okay to insult British ministers and to insult our side. Yet you can imagine if it was the same situation of, say, a British diplomat in China, it just wouldn't happen. So I really want to see much more assertiveness against China. I'm not saying just cut off all links, but we need to wake up and see what Beijing is doing. It's very underhand tactics. I don't believe they can be trusted. I mean, this is a regime that has lied for 30 years about the Tiananmen Square crackdown. So if they're going to lie to their own people, of course they're going to lie to international opponents. China is not a friend of Britain. Maybe the Chinese people are. Maybe we can have cross-cultural exchanges, not Confucius institutes, as Confucius institutes are a front for communist propaganda. I have no problem with people-to-people relations. Many of my friends are Chinese. I have close connections with the country. Um, but in terms of the Chinese government, I don't think they can be trusted. I think for a very long time now, they've been doing their level best to sabotage and undermine Western democracy all the time, whinging about the West interfering in their internal affairs. And yet, what do? They stir up the Chinese diaspora, you know. So it's about time that a British government shows some backbone and stands up to Beijing. Of course, they'll whinge about it. Of course, they'll play the victimhood narrative. Let them. We need to speak out. So part of me cannot help but think, is Gavin Williamson being scapegoated because of that? Because he, more than other ministers, was outspoken? I don't know. He may well be guilty. I don't know. But put it this way, when he did speak out, I felt compelled to actually phone up his office, and I did, and commend him for doing so. Because I believe that ministers who get it right, who are assertive, need to be supported. And I think it was a real sadness that his colleagues turned on him when Philip Hammond and Theresa May didn't have the backbone to speak out against Beijing, and he did. Maybe it was reckless, and it can be derided as private pike. Maybe he is a pretty slippery character, but it's politics. I'd rather have a slippery character who at least is right about something rather than nice, polite people who are showing weakness.